Dear friends, thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. What I'm about to share with you today might not be an unfamiliar tale to many parents out there, but it is the one that has left the deepest, most indelible scar on my life. This is my story, the story of a father living with a chronic illness. Every single night, the arthritis would flare up, a relentless torment in my joints. But I gritted my teeth and fought my way through it, one painful step, one ragged breath at a time. I did it all for one reason, for my son, and for the little family he was building. I did it to provide for them, to worry for them, to build a stable foundation under their feet. I wasn't asking for the world. I never expected anything in return. All I ever wanted was a little empathy, a look of gratitude, maybe just the simple, gentle words, "Dad, please don't push yourself so hard." That would have been more than enough for me. And yet, even that small kindness was a luxury as far out of reach as the clouds. They often say that money is a double-edged sword. For a long time, I believed that by using my money to raise my child, to give him a comfortable and prosperous life, I was wielding that sword to cut a clear path for him through any hardship. But I never, ever imagined that the blade would turn back on me, piercing my own heart without a shred of mercy. Have you ever known a pain like this? In all my years, it never once crossed my mind that I could be betrayed by the one person trusted most in this world, my own son. I could never have conceived that the day would come when the very mouth I once fed the child I held in my arms, the reason I skipped meals and worked through the wind and the rain just to buy him that new school backpack he so desperately wanted, would one day be the source of such vicious rumors and cruel, fabricated stories about me. But today, to them, I have become nothing more than a burden. In their eyes, I am just an obstacle in their way. I'm not telling you all this just to complain. I only hope that those of you who still have your parents with you will pause for just a moment and listen to your own hearts. If you do, I think you'll understand that no father, no mother is born to be a burden. We simply grow old, quietly. All the while, we are hoping to be loved just as we loved you. Please listen to my story. It's a story that, every time I recall it, makes my heart ache with a sharp, unspeakable pain, as if it's being squeezed in a vice. I remember that fateful day as clearly as if it were yesterday. The evening sun was slanting through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. My hands, tormented by the chronic arthritis I'd lived with for years, were trembling, but I held on tight to the hot soup pot I had just taken off the stove. Steam rose and warmed my face, but a chill had settled deep inside me, freezing me from the inside out. A sharp pain shot through my knees. It was a familiar ache, one that had been my constant companion for over a decade. But no, that physical pain, it was nothing. Nothing at all compared to the mortal blade that had just been driven straight through my heart. I stood frozen in the shadow of the kitchen doorway. Just moments before, I'd heard the sharp, high-pitched voice of my daughter-in-law, Susan, cutting through the low rumble of my son Michael's reply. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but every single word pierced my ears and lodged itself deep in my soul. "She has her own pension money, Michael. Why does she act so helpless all the time? Is she just pretending to be sick so she can sponge off of us?" Her words echoed in my head like a clap of thunder. Pretending to be sick? Sponging off them? I am 78 years old. I have spent my entire life dedicating myself to my family, working my fingers to the bone to make sure they had everything they needed. And now, to be hit with such venomous words, my chronic arthritis, there are days I can't even lift my arms, days I can barely walk on my own. And they thought I was lying about it. Even when the pain was so bad, I could barely raise my hands to brush my own hair, I still cooked 3 meals a day. I did the laundry. I walked my grandson to and from his school bus stop at the corner, and I did it all for one simple reason: I never, ever wanted to be a burden to my children. I kept telling myself that as long as I could still contribute, as long as I could still do these small things for the household, they wouldn't see me as a nuisance. I gave it my all, swallowing every sigh, pushing down the ache that settled deep in my bones, just to keep the peace in the house, to keep the atmosphere calm and happy. But on that day, standing there with the soup pot shaking in my hands, I realized something. I wasn't a burden at all. No, far from it. I was the very asset they were whispering about how to squeeze dries. The realization was so cold, so cruel, that I felt my knees buckle. And I nearly collapsed right there on the floor. Since my arthritis had worsened, walking had become more difficult than ever before. My doctor had warned me to rest, to avoid any strenuous activity, and especially to stay away from climbing stairs. So, when my son Michael suggested I come live with his family, I agreed. I believed it was an act of kindness, of love for his aging mother. I trusted him completely. But the only room they gave me was on the second floor of the house. It was a small, cramped space with just one little window that looked out onto the neighbor's siding, and it never got much light. Worst of all, the steep, narrow staircase leading up to it had no extra handrails, no support bars, nothing to help an old woman with bad knees. Every single day, climbing those stairs became a grueling ordeal, a mountain I had to conquer just to get to my own bed. Each step was a battle. My hand would grip the wooden banisters so tightly, my knuckles turned white. My legs would tremble beneath me, and my knees would make a horrible grinding sound, a sound like gravel being crushed under a heavy weight. Sometimes, a sharp pain would shoot all the way up my spine and into the back of my head, so intense that I had to stop right there on the landing, gasping for air, just waiting for the wave of agony to pass. I knew my daughter-in-law, Susan, was almost always in the kitchen, right at the bottom of the stairs. I never wanted to bother her, not for a glass of water, not for a book I'd left on the coffee table. The very idea of being a burden, even for a moment, filled me with a sense of guilt so profound it felt like a stone in my stomach. I used to believe that if I just didn't complain, everything would work out. If I just kept quiet, did everything I could to help, and always smiled and said, "I'm fine, dear," then my children would love me, they would respect me. I truly, honestly believed that. I thought that a mother's silent sacrifice would be repaid with warmth and with gratitude. That was a beautiful dream. And one afternoon, it was shattered into a million pieces. I had just finished all the laundry for the week, washing, drying, and folding every last towel and t-shirt, and was resting on the recliner in the living room. Michael and Susan were talking in the kitchen. I suppose they thought I had dozed off, or that my hearing wasn't what it used to be. "Your mother is always pretending to be sick," I heard Susan say, her voice a sharp whisper. "She gets that Social Security check every month, you know. But does she ever offer to help with the bills? No, she's just a freeloader." Every word was a needle, first pricking my ear, then plunging straight into my heart. I couldn't breathe. What did she say? Pretending to be sick? A freeloader? Me? The one who used my Social Security money every month to buy all the groceries for the house? The one who paid for my grandson's preschool tuition, the boy I loved more than life itself? The one who quietly slipped Michael cash to help with the electric and water bills whenever I saw them struggling? I was the one doing all that, and now I was being called a freeloader? My vision blurred with tears. A film started playing in my mind, rewinding through the years. I saw all the meals I'd cooked, the mountains of clothes I'd washed, all the long nights I'd lain awake, unable to sleep because the fire in my joints was too much to bear. I saw how hard I had pushed myself, how much pain I had hidden, all to prove that I was still useful, that I wasn't in their way. But it turned out all of that effort, all of that sacrifice, was nothing more than a clumsy performance in their eyes. Just a pathetic act put on by an old woman, pretending to be sick so she could cling to her children. My heart ached then, with a pain far deeper and sharper than any arthritis. It was the pain of cruelty, of ingratitude, of the cold, hard words spoken by my own son, the child I had brought into this world and dedicated my entire life to raising. After that day, my life became something like a silent movie. I went through all the motions, just as I always had. I cooked the meals, I did the laundry, I walked my grandson to the bus stop and was there waiting when he came home. But on the inside, a deep, jagged crack had split my heart in two. I would look at my son, Michael, and my daughter-in-law, Susan, and I would search their faces, desperate to find even a flicker of regret, a trace of the love I thought was there. But all I found was a cold, flat indifference. Sometimes, if I fumbled and dropped my fork, or if the pain in my knees made me walk too slowly, I would see a flash of irritation in their eyes. Then came the morning that changed everything. I was in the laundry room, bent over the washing machine, my back aching as I tried to pull out a heavy load of wet towels. Suddenly, I heard a little clack on the tiled floor. My daughter-in-law's smartphone had slipped out of her jacket pocket and landed right beside the machine. The screen was still lit up, glowing in the dim light of the room. My first instinct, of course, was to pick it up and give it back to her. I had no intention of prying, not for a second. But as I reached for it, a message popped up on the screen, and the words were so clear, so stark, that they held my gaze like a terrible curse. "Just let the old lady keep working for us," the message read. "A few more months and we can get her into one of those state-run homes for free." My mind spun. A state-run home? For me? My fingers started to tremble so badly that I nearly dropped the phone. Beneath that first text was a reply from one of Susan's friends, written in a tone of casual agreement. "So selfish for someone her age," it said. "If she won't give you access to her savings account, what choice do you have?" A violent shiver ran through my entire body. A wave of ice-cold water seemed to wash down my spine and pierce me directly in the heart. I never knew. All this time, I had no idea. The meals I cooked every day, the soup I made for the grandson I loved more than life itself, the Social Security money I used to pay for our groceries and bills, it was all just a part of their quiet plan to get rid of me. I wasn't a mother. I wasn't a grandmother. I was just a tool, a resource to be used up, squeezed of every last drop of value, and then discarded the moment I was no longer useful. Hot, salty tears began to pour from my eyes, streaming down the wrinkles on my cheeks and wetting my dry, parted lips. I have lived for 78 years, and I have seen my share of sorrow and hardship, but I had never, ever in my life felt so wounded, so completely and utterly betrayed. The feeling of being used and deceived by my own flesh and blood was a pain. Sharper and more agonizing than any flare-up of arthritis I had ever endured. I clutched my hands to my chest, trying to draw a steady breath, but my lungs felt tight, as if a band were being squeezed around them. The whole world around me, the world I had built with my own two hands, felt like it was crumbling into dust. Ever since I read that message, I've been living like a ghost in what was supposed to be my home, just drifting from room to room in a silent daze. At every meal, I would find myself just staring down at the food I'd cooked, but nothing would go down my throat. Every time I looked at my son and my daughter-in-law, it felt like an invisible wall had been built between us, thick and cold. I knew the truth now, and that truth was eating away at my soul, one little piece at a time. One afternoon, I was trying to close my eyes for just a moment, hoping to ease the ache that seemed to run through my entire body. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, sharp and loud, jolting me out of my light doze. I heard my daughter-in-law, Susan, answer the door, and then the sound of hushed voices from the entryway. I didn't pay it much mind at first, but then I heard footsteps moving into the living room, followed by a familiar voice. And I sat straight up. It was our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, a kind, gentle woman I'd often chatted with over the fence. "Susan was just telling me," Mrs. Peterson said, her voice filled with a strange mix of concern and doubt, "that the grandmother has been hitting her grandson, and that there's been screaming all through the night. Is that true?" I froze in place. Hitting my grandson? Screaming all night? Never. I had never, not once in my life, laid a single hand on that precious little boy. Every single night, I was the one who read him fairy tales and sang him lullabies until he finally drifted off to sleep. When he had a bad dream, I was the one who would rub his back until he felt safe again, and his breathing grew steady. So often, even deep in his sleep, his little hand would find mine and squeeze it tight, like it was an unspoken bond between the two of us. How could she invent such a horrible, monstrous lie about me? I scrambled out of my chair and rushed into the living room. My son, Michael, was sitting there on the sofa, just watching television. I looked him straight in the eye, my own eyes pleading with him for an explanation, for a denial, for anything. "Michael," I said, my voice trembling. "What is she saying? You know I have never once laid a hand on my grandson." My son, Michael, just stayed silent. He wouldn't even look at me. His eyes were glued to the flickering television screen as if he were in a trance. He didn't deny his wife's words. That crushing silence, it hurt more than any accusation ever could. It was a silent admission, a confession that he was a part of this cruel slander. In that instant, it felt like my whole world had turned upside down. I felt like I was standing in the middle of a hurricane, and the people I loved most in this world were the very ones stabbing me in the back with the sharpest knives. That night, the fire in my joints flared up worse than ever before. But it wasn't only that. My heart started to pound so hard, I thought it was going to beat right out of my chest. My vision grew blurry, and little black spots danced in front of my eyes. I reached out to lean against the wall for support. But my arms and legs felt like dead weight, and all my strength was gone. I knew this wasn't just the usual ache in my joints. This was something else. Something much, much worse. I stumbled, trying to get to the phone, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even dial the numbers. And then, finally, I collapsed onto the cold floor. I don't know how long I was lying there. When I came to, I was in a hospital bed. I remember the bright, white lights overhead and the sharp, clean smell of disinfectant. My son and my daughter-in-law, they weren't there. A doctor, a middle-aged man with a serious face, was looking down at me. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "you are a very lucky woman. Another 30 minutes, and you might not have made it." Hearing his words, I didn't feel scared anymore. All I felt was a deep, hollow emptiness. My body had reached its limit, and my spirit had too. I had endured so much. The lies, the betrayal, the cruel rumors, it had all piled up, becoming this enormous weight that was finally crushing me. I just lay there, staring up at the blank white ceiling, and I asked myself, why? Why has my life turned into such a tragedy? I was in the hospital for 5 days. 5 days that felt as long as 5 years. Not one person from my son's family came to visit me. I didn't get a single phone call. I was just there, all alone, surrounded by those white walls, feeling like the whole world had forgotten I even existed. But there was one person, a young nurse named Clara, who took care of me with real kindness. It seemed she had overheard bits and pieces of my story from some of the neighbors who were visiting other patients on the floor. One afternoon, when my room was empty, she came in and quietly asked me if there was anyone I'd like to call. And all of a sudden, I thought of my sister, Hannah. She still lives back in our hometown. It had been so long since we'd last spoken. "I'd like to call my sister back home," I told her, "but I can't remember her number." Clara gave me a gentle smile, her eyes full of sympathy. She found my old address book and looked through it until she found Hannah's number. And then she dialed it for me. The moment Hannah heard my voice on the other end of the line, her own voice started to break. I tried to hold back my emotions. I really did, but I just couldn't anymore. I told my sister everything. I told her about the cruel words, the messages on the phone, the awful rumors, and how I had collapsed. Hannah was sobbing into the phone, and she promised she would come see me as soon as she possibly could. It was a short phone call, but it felt like a tiny ray of light had finally broken through the darkness of my despair. After I was discharged from the hospital, I came back to the house I had once thought of as my home. When I walked into my room, a wave of exhaustion so deep it felt like it was in my bones washed over me. I wanted to take out my savings passbook and check the balance. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that I was going to need money to figure out what came next in my life. I went to the drawer where I'd kept it safe for years, tucked away under my winter sweaters, but it wasn't there. My heart started to pound against my ribs, a frantic, panicked rhythm. I tore the room apart, pulling out every drawer, checking under the mattress, looking inside old shoeboxes I'd stored in the back of the closet. But the passbook was nowhere to be found. A cold dread began to creep up my spine. My hands shaking, I hurried downstairs to find my daughter-in-law, Susan, and asked her, my voice barely a whisper, "Susan dear, my savings passbook, do you have any idea where it could be?" She just looked at me with a flat, calm expression, though I could see a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "Grandma, you're getting older now," she said, her tone falsely sweet. "We thought it would be safest if we held onto it for you. We wouldn't want you to lose it." Holding onto it? The excuse was so thin, so transparent, it was almost insulting. I knew then. They had taken it. The feeling of being robbed by your own family, by the very people you're supposed to trust, is a violation far worse than any common thief could inflict. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided then and there that I had to bring everything out into the light. I called my oldest and dearest friend, Sarah. She'd worked her way up to a manager position at a major bank downtown, and I knew if anyone could help me, it would be her. I had to swallow my shame, my pride, and the terrible pain in my heart to tell her what had been happening to me. Sarah listened, her face filled with such deep sympathy, and she promised she would help me figure it out. A few days later, Sarah called me. Her voice was trembling with a mixture of shock and anger. "Evelyn, I'm so sorry to tell you this," she began, her voice low. "Over $140,000 has been withdrawn from your account, in several large transfers. The most recent one, it was made right after you were admitted to the hospital. $140,000. That was my entire life. It was my Social Security, the money from selling our old family home after my husband passed, and every last penny I had carefully saved from the little extra I made selling. My handmade quilts at the church craft fairs. It was all gone. At that moment, I couldn't even cry anymore. The pain was beyond tears. It had gone past a threshold I never knew existed. All I felt was a horrifying, paralyzing numbness, a terrifying emptiness that hollowed me out completely. I had been betrayed, deceived, and now I had been stripped of everything. My entire life felt like it had just been swallowed by quicksand. In that moment, when I realized I had lost it all, not just the money, but every last shred of trust I had in my own children, I knew I could not be silent any longer. My silence had only made me a victim. It had enabled their cruelty and fed their greed. I had nearly died in that hospital. I had been slandered to my neighbors. And now my life savings had been stolen, all because I chose to endure, to not make waves. But now I had nothing left to lose. I decided it was time to raise my voice. I submitted a formal request to our local community association, explaining the situation clearly and calmly. At first, they seemed hesitant, unsure of how to get involved in a family matter. But when I began to present them with the concrete evidence I had, bank statements, timelines, they had no choice but to listen. I proposed a public talk at the community center on the topic of elder abuse in the modern American family. I wanted my story to be more than just my own personal tragedy. I wanted it to become a voice for the thousands of other elderly people who were suffering through their own quiet abuse, hidden behind closed doors. On the day of the talk, the community hall was packed. I saw familiar faces, neighbors I'd known for years, and many people I'd never seen before. There were even a few journalists from the local paper who had heard the rumors and come to see what was happening. I stood up on the small stage. My hands were trembling, but when I began to speak, my voice came out clear and steady. I told them everything. I told them about when I first came to live with my son, about the joint pain that shot through my legs every time I climbed the stairs, about the meals I'd cooked with love, and then about the lies, the cruel messages on the phone, the slander that I had hit my own grandson. and how the shock of it all had nearly killed me. I didn't forget to present every piece of evidence. I had the bank statements proving that over $140,000 had been withdrawn in several large transfers, the screenshots of my daughter-in-law's text messages, and even the discharge papers from my hospital stay. When I spoke about my savings passbook being stolen, a hush fell over the entire hall. But when I presented the proof that my life savings, all $140,000, had vanished, a murmur started to ripple through the crowd. The people gathered there were all stunned, then outraged on my behalf. I could see a few of the older women in the front row wiping tears from their eyes, who were unable to hold them back. A video of my talk was shared widely online by people who had been in the audience. In no time at all, my story spread across social media and became a trending topic. News outlets started calling, asking to interview me, and soon my story was being featured in major newspapers. My son's family was condemned by the entire community. They received hundreds, then thousands of messages of criticism and anger from every corner. Their reputation was completely destroyed. I don't know what happened to them after that, what they ultimately faced, but I do know that this was the price they paid for their greed and their cruelty. I didn't feel a sense of triumph, not at all, but I did feel an immeasurable sense of relief. The truth was finally out. Finally, I didn't have to suffer alone anymore. After everything was brought out into the open, I decided I couldn't stay in that house for a single day longer. I didn't want to be in a place that only reminded me of betrayal and pain. I left my son's home with nothing more than a few changes of clothes and the handful of keepsakes I had left. I didn't feel sadness or regret anymore. Instead, a feeling of relief, a freedom I had never known before, welled up in my heart. With the little money I had left in my account, a tiny fraction of what I had lost, I found a small apartment in a senior living community with on-site medical services. It was a quiet, clean place, with a little balcony that overlooked a lush green garden. Every morning, I would brew a warm cup of tea and sit by the window, reading a book or doing some light stretching exercises designed for seniors. There was no one shouting at me, no one making demands, no one accusing me of faking an illness. I could finally just be myself and enjoy the peaceful moments I had craved for so long. My arthritis was still there, of course, but the pain seemed to have lessened a great deal. Perhaps when the heart is free from its wounds, the body feels lighter too. I started to write my memoirs. I wanted to put down everything I had been through, not to complain or hold on to grudges, but to share my story so that others might not make the same mistakes I did. I titled my memoir, My Life with Arthritis. Stolen by Greed.ic. Every word I wrote was a piece of my soul, a tear, a sigh, and also one of the few smiles I had found in my new life. I wrote about the physical and emotional pain, about the betrayal from my own children. I wrote about the betrayal, and I wrote about my journey to find myself again. I wrote it all down to remind myself that no matter how difficult life becomes, a person can always stand back up and find the light after the storm. My life now is no longer a burden. It is a journey of freedom, a journey of self-respect and peace. And so, my dear friends, my story comes to a close here. For so long, I truly believed that if I just didn't complain, everything would turn out all right in the end. I believed that my silence would keep the peace in our family, and that it would make my children love me more. But the harsh truth of the world taught me a very expensive lesson. When you stay silent for too long, it only encourages cruelty. It only makes those who take advantage of you grow bolder, and it pushes the victim into an even deeper well of pain. To all of you who are listening to my story today, especially my fellow seniors, if you are living with your family, please take these words to heart. You have the right to be respected. You have dedicated your life. You have loved, and you have sacrificed. Growing old is not a burden. It is a stage of life that should be cherished and protected. You deserve to receive respect and sincere care from the people you love. You should never have to pay for affection. True love is never conditional. It never demands blind sacrifice or unreasonable obedience. If love comes at the price of your own suffering, at the cost of everything you have, then it is not love at all. And if, one day, you find your heart being wounded by the sharp words, the careless actions, or the abuse of your own flesh and blood, please, I beg you, speak up. Do not be afraid. Do not just endure it. Reach out and seek help from the people around you, from your community, from social organizations. There are so many people out there who will listen to you and support you. Your silence only gives the abuser an opportunity to continue what they are doing. Be brave, stand up, and protect yourself. Because a true family bond never ever involves abuse. A true family bond is built on care, on understanding, on respect, and on unconditional love. And if you cannot find those things within your own family, then you must find them somewhere else, or build a peaceful life for yourself, by yourself. I will close my story here for today. I know it was not a happy tale to listen to, but I hope that something I've shared has resonated, even just a little, in your hearts. I have been through days that felt impossible to overcome, days of immense pain, both in my body and in my spirit. But it was in those very darkest moments that I found the strength to stand, to raise my voice, and to win back my own freedom. In this life, no matter how much hardship we face, there is always a path for us to find peace and happiness. To every one of you who has listened to my story all the way to the end, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your attention and your care are a source of immeasurable encouragement for an old woman like me. I hope I will have the chance to see you all again in my next video. When I do, I hope to share more with you about my new life, about the lessons I've learned. And perhaps, together, we can find a new ray of hope. I sincerely wish you all good health, peace, and happiness, always.